Well, we have a great program tonight focusing on the street trees of Seattle, documenting our changing history, which is Taha Ebrahimi's brand new book, which is so exciting. If you haven't seen it, you're going to hear all about it this evening, but you also can buy it and take home your own copy, right, Taha? And I think they're for sale in the back, so be sure to do that. And we are joined by several special guests. So let me go into the official introductions. Taha Ebrahimi, who we're going to hear from this evening, is the director of Tableau Public, which is a free platform to explore, create, and share online data visualizations about life in our communities. She is a native Seattleite and lived on the East Coast until a few years ago when she came back. And her writing, she's a writer as well as the author of this book. She's writing has appeared in Creative Nonfiction, Crosscut, the Seattle Times, and a whole bunch of other places. And she serves as a member of the Historic Seattle Council, which does such great work in our community, and is also a board member for the Cal Anderson Park Alliance. So thank you, Taha, for all you're doing. And Taha is going to be joined by two other people who will be up here just momentarily, two of the best people for recording Seattle history. Susanna Ryan. Susanna is a Seattle-based illustrator, and she's the author of the Seattle Walks Report, which again, if you have not seen it, it's in the back. You have to see it. It's so much fun. It's an illustrated walking tour through 23 Seattle neighborhoods. She also wrote Secret Seattle, an illustrated guide to the city's offbeat and overlooked history. And finally, and this one, Suzanne, you'll have to fill me in on more details. I don't think I've read this one, Dog Days, Your Fur Baby Memory Book. So those are all wonderful books that you have to look at. And in 2021, Susanna was named one of Seattle Magazine's most influential people in Washington State. So we are very lucky to have her. And finally, I want to let you know that we're being joined this evening by the amazing Cynthia brothers, whose media empire, Vanishing Seattle, is an absolute must-see for anyone who cares about our city, past and present and future. It celebrates the spaces and communities that give us our character and our soul. Cynthia was named one of Seattle's most influential in Seattle Met Magazine as well. 2 years, 2018 and 2023. That's probably a record. And she's also very involved with the Chinatown International District Coalition, and it previously has presented at Mohi rather, and so you probably are familiar with her from that. So please welcome Taha, Susanna, and Cynthia.
I am so honored and excited to be here today with these two ladies. And we'll each share a little bit about our projects, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And one of the first things when we first got together and talked about the commonalities of our projects is that I think that we are all documenting in different ways a city that we love very much that is changing very fast. So we've all done it in different ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that each. And I get to start off. So Street Trees of Seattle is oh, nice. That's even better. Thank you. Street Trees of Seattle is an illustrated walking guide, and it's based on publicly available data that the city publishes every year, and it goes back to 1950. And I show you where the widest diameter and first recorded street trees across 50 genus are located in about 30 different neighborhoods in Seattle. And what I learned in the process of this project is that trees are very much interconnected with our cultural histories, and especially public trees that are shared with a community and that live in collective memory. If you show me a city's trees, I could probably tell you the story of that city. So this is a picture of Seattle taken in 1882. And you're looking from the Beacon Hill Bridge, if you can believe it, towards Pioneer Square. And here, just to give you some context, that's the Smith Tower. And that peninsula that it's on is essentially downtown Seattle. And all the water south of that was filled in and turned into today's Sodo. So 3 years before this picture was taken in 1879, the last original tree in the downtown area had been logged, which we forget about. We're the Emerald City and the Evergreen State. It was all clear cut. So the area we are standing on right now, the traditional land of the Duwamish people, had been previously covered in thick forest, mostly evergreen. And here's what it looks like today, that exact view. Once again, there's the Smith Tower for context, and there they are side by side. So today, believe it or not, based on the city's data, only about 5% of Seattle's right-of-way trees are originally native to this region. Everything else, most of what you see today, was brought here from somewhere else and planted relatively not that long ago. So people often planted what was familiar to them, and they leave clues about what came before. Trees are a kind of witness and connection to what came before. In 2020, this is when it began. You may remember these signs in parks everywhere. It was during the pandemic lockdown, and many of the streets were closed off to cars. There were no airplanes in the sky. The public parks stopped mowing their lawns. It felt like time had stopped. And that's honestly when I started taking these epic walks in my neighborhood, and when I started noticing the street trees. And I was born and raised in Seattle, and I had taken these trees for granted that entire time. I got a book called Sibley's Guide to Trees, and you see that right here. It was mostly illustrations. And remember, I was all alone during that time, so I couldn't know for certain if I was identifying the trees correctly just by looking at a picture. I needed something else. And that's when I discovered this legendary book, if you don't know about it yet, called Trees of Seattle. It's from the 1980s by Arthur Lee Jacobson. And this book had actual addresses of specific tree species so I could visit and see them in person. The only problem here was that it was all text. So I actually needed both of these books in order to learn about trees. And you can imagine how ridiculous I looked. I really was carrying both of these books, and I was often pulling out my phone and looking at the address. So in the beginning, it was literally out of sheer necessity that I started drawing tree maps. And that got all the information on one piece of paper, so I could just walk around with that. Well, I ended up making a lot of those tree maps. There was something very calming about it for me. And eventually, I found that publicly available data set that I mentioned that the city releases. And since I work at a data visualization company, I got predictably obsessed with that data set. So on my walks, something happened to me. And it was that act of traveling with my own feet at a walking pace, deciphering these handwritten maps and looking for these physical identifying features of trees. It forced me to be present. And there was something really oddly satisfying about identifying and finding and confirming these trees. And during that time, I was spending a lot of time inside, in my head, not really present, looking at two-dimensional screens. As I mentioned before, I was born and raised in Seattle, but when I went on these walks, it was like I was seeing these neighborhoods in a whole different way. I had never seen them like this before. It was like a portal had opened and I had walked into a second dimension. And I wanted to share that experience. So in my book, Street Trees of Seattle, I've created about 30 hand-drawn neighborhood maps like this one on the screen. And on those maps, I have noted the notable street trees for you to find. And when Cynthia, Susanna, and I first got together, we talked about the threads in common with our projects. And we realized pretty quickly, as I mentioned before, that we're all basically documenting a city that we love that is rapidly changing. And we thought it would be fun for each one of us to show how we use different mediums and styles to capture and document the same neighborhood in different ways. And I'll start out with this. We chose the neighborhood you see here, which is the Central District, a specific area called Cherry Hill. And as it turns out, Cherry Hill is, coincidentally or not, where the city's widest cherry street tree exists. I thought that was interesting. There were cherry street trees all about the same age on this street. Here's a picture of that widest cherry street tree. It's actually a Japanese hill cherry, and the city had mislabeled it as a Sargent cherry. And the city also claimed that it had no Japanese hill cherries as street trees. For me, finding and identifying street trees is about making contact with a place. So this cherry street tree got me to do some digging so I could find out exactly when it was planted. And I'll share that story. So one of the ways I find out when a particular street tree is planted is I look through old archival photos. And so I searched around for archival photos that had Cherry Hill in the description. And this was one of those photos that I found. And this photo actually ended up being the key. And it was taken in 1959 after World War II. And you see a woman in the middle smiling and some official-looking guys around her in this pile of trash. Many people after World War II had moved to Seattle for defense-related jobs at places like Boeing. And I was actually able to close up on this picture, kind of a little CSI, and find out that the numbers above that door said 313. And also take note of that circle, that design of the window shade there. That is important later on. I used the house address, and I essentially went through every street in Cherry Hill. I popped it into Google Maps to see if I could see any similarities. And guess what I found out? That exact photo happened to be on the exact same street where the widest cherry street tree in Seattle was located. And here's that same porch. You remember I circled that, and you can see it in the other picture as well. And remember that window. So most importantly, what you see is that cherry tree is not there yet. And judging by the size of the trees today, I'm guessing they may have been planted not very long, actually, after that photo was taken. So that photo got me really curious. What clues did it hold? The caption underneath mentioned it was the cleanup crew for the Cherry Hill Urban Renewal Project. So I started looking into that. I had not heard of that before. It turns out that the Cherry Hill Urban Renewal Project was a project to improve so-called blight in areas from about 1959, when this photo was taken, apparently as a publicity shot. And the program went on for about 17 years, ending in 1976. And maybe the street trees had even been symbolically planted as the kickoff to the campaign, which wouldn't be untold. And it would make a lot of sense, considering it was called Cherry Hill. 1 year after that photo was taken, in 1960, the first part of that project started. And the first part was when the building department began the first phase of the project, enforcing new housing codes on a spot basis. The idea was that after the building department pointed out what the homes needed, they would then help folks secure loans and financial assistance to renovate their homes. But sadly, that's not actually what happened. As I did my research, I found out that those loans never materialized. And instead, people who weren't able to meet the new minimum housing code had their homes forcibly condemned. This is another photo from that same series in 1959. There were about 3 pictures. And remember, this photo was taken before anyone knew that the project wasn't going to work out or that they might lose their homes. So under state law, for those who get displaced by eminent domain, people get relocation expenses. But the families that were displaced by code enforcement did not qualify for that. By 1968, over 1,000 structures in Cherry Hill had been razed or condemned due to code enforcement. And later, in 1981, a report was created that determined that the Cherry Hill Urban Renewal Project was directly responsible for displacing, quotation mark, more people than any other activity at that time in Seattle history. And it was also considered a major contributing factor to the shortage of housing, since many of those homes that were razed and demolished ended up being vacant lots for many, many, many years. But thanks to the widest cherry street tree in the entire city, I was able to make contact with that story. As I mentioned, they are witness to things that have happened in the past. I took a picture and printed it out, and actually that telephone pole that you see there in the photo is the exact same telephone pole that's in the photo that I'm holding. The knots match exactly. Seattle's widest diameter cherry street tree is just one of the trees mapped in my book. Of the 600 or so trees that I validated, about 22% had been incorrectly recorded by the city, so I've corrected all of those. And before I pass this on to Cynthia and Susanna to tell their stories, I'm going to read 3 short paragraphs from the book, Street Trees of Seattle, and it's about the data that I used. So as I walk the neighborhoods of Seattle to validate the trees behind the data points in person, I regularly noticed other trees that were destination worthy for various reasons. Trees hunched in strange shapes, trees in beautiful locations, trees that evoked memories and witnessed history. In Leshai, I saw an English maple with an abnormal growth, sheathing its trunk, making it appear cinched at its waist. A man walking his dog at the time stopped to comment about how unusual the tree was and how everyone in the neighborhood used it as a landmark. It would be ridiculous not to include this tree in a list of noteworthy street trees. Yet it had not turned up in any of my analysis because it did not rank high in any of the categories of information that had been collected in the city's data. The growth was too far up the trunk to be counted as part of the measurement of its trunk diameter. And in fact, the tree didn't rank highly no matter how I sorted the fields. If I had not taken a physical walk in the neighborhood and seen the entire tree in person, and if I had only been at my desk limiting my analysis to just the data, as much analysis is often done, I would have missed this landmark tree. And this is a reminder that data is flawed from the very moment it is collected. And that's because it consists of only what can be measured, which is by nature only the superficial. The nature of data is a dual trap. In the specific case of this book, not only are there overlooked trees, but the trees that are included take on incommensurate importance. The information collected takes highest priority simply because it exists. It reminded me that data analysts and researchers are similarly expected to use data as their starting point. But such analysis inevitably underestimates the bias that is implicit in collecting and processing data, discounting the intangibles of lived experience. So data is many things, but most of all, data is dangerous because it lends a false sense of objectivity and truth, as if it illuminates the totality of a picture. Deeper analysis, of course, requires a level of intimate understanding that must take place beyond the numbers. And my hope is that this book will take you there, helping you make contact with the urban forest, and to know the stories that came before us, and to connect with a sense of place that data by itself can never capture. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Susanna Ryan, and I am the author of the books Seattle Walk Report, an illustrated walking tour through 23 Seattle neighborhoods, and Secret Seattle, an illustrated guide to the city's offbeat and overlooked history, both based on an Instagram comic series called Seattle Walk Report that I started in 2017. In 2017, I, a passionate, lifelong indoor enthusiast, did the unthinkable. I left my Capitol Hill apartment and decided to take a walk. It sounds kind of wild to say that I had never just gone outside for no reason before, but I am pretty sure I had never gone outside for no reason before. Why would I? There's trash. There's hills, there's people with clipboards wanting me to save the whales or something. No, thank you. Walking had always played a small role in my life prior to this day because I never learned how to drive and have never had a car. But that kind of walking was a means to an end, trying to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible so I could return to my one true love, sitting on my couch with all the lights off. Growing up, you were much more likely to find me doodling in the margins of my notebooks or making extremely elaborate birthday cards for my grandma. I have just never really been the athletic type, walking included. While I've never had any formal art training, drawing is just something I've always liked to do. But in 2017, headphones put away, open heart, open mind, with a single step out the front door, it just all clicked. Almost instantly, Seattle began revealing itself to me in ways that I had never taken the time to notice before, and everything I saw seemed remarkable. Streets I thought I knew well turned into opportunities for delightful new discoveries. In a little park that I had lived blocks away from for 7 years but never even knew existed, I found a Tamagotchi, one of those little keychain toys that was popular in the mid-90s, hanging on a tree branch.
What?
It was magic. An abandoned pile of goldfish crackers on the sidewalk was no longer just random litter. It was a tasty little sidewalk mystery waiting to be unraveled. I wondered endlessly about the people that I passed on the streets, about the things I saw, about these tiny, nearly invisible stories playing out thousands of times a day on hundreds of sidewalks across the city that would be so easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Just by being present and having an open mind, I had tapped into a secret world that had been right under my nose this entire time. After that day, my passion for walking and tolerance for blisters only grew. What began as walks around Capitol Hill expanded outwards to other neighborhoods, covering ground that would have seemed like an absolute nightmare to me only months before. I walked from Lake City to Capitol Hill, from Queen Anne to Beacon Hill, from wherever I was to wherever I found myself hours later, and then on my next day off from work, I would do it again. But as the miles and sights racked up, all my walks started blending together, and I feared that I was starting to forget something that had become an unexpectedly huge part of my life. So one day on a walk somewhere in Inner Bay, I got the idea to create what I envisioned as an illustrated travel journal for my own city, figuring that I would record the route, the mileage, and whatever happened to catch my eye that day. Starting an illustrated walking journal seemed like a great way to combine my newfound love of walking with my lifelong yet kind of dormant love of drawing. The stakes couldn't be lower. I didn't plan on sharing this walking art project. I thought I would buy a cute new notebook and keep it to myself, or more accurately, I thought I would buy a cute new notebook and then put it on my shelf because I didn't want to start writing on it. But after taking my first walk with this idea, a 5-mile walk from Capitol Hill to the U District, and creating the first entry, I felt something gnawing at me. Something was telling me to put this out there for other people to find, even if nobody ever did. Maybe there were other people just like me, seeing the things I see, or wanting to see the things I see, or just wanting to connect with Seattle in a different way. Or maybe not. But walking had completely changed my perspective of the city and of myself, honestly. News about Seattle, which prior to walking, I was consuming more than I was actually out experiencing Seattle for myself, indoor person, seemed to occupy either this extreme, nonstop dumpster fire type sentiment, or this overly sanitized thing that I didn't feel like I could relate to at all. But with every abandoned David Hasselhoff memoir on the sidewalk, or cute cat spotted, or Washington Mutual deposit bag in a bush, it seemed like there was a tiny story about Seattle going untold. So I thought, why not try to tell it? On a whim, I signed up for Instagram and shared the first installment. This is the very first Seattle Walk Report documenting a 5-mile walk to the U District. I lost the original drawing, so it's a little bit hard to see, so I'll just share a little highlight. I saw 21 dogs, which means I saw 3.1 dogs per mile. Fun. From there, I just kept plodding along at 2 miles an hour, walking and making Seattle Walk Report, yet suddenly it felt like I was living life in the fast lane. Somehow, some way, well, through word of mouth and algorithms, people did discover the comic. Maybe a month or two in, I was on the light rail and two people were having a conversation in front of me about Seattle Walk Report, where one was explaining to the other what it was, and as a sneaky little creep, I was like, this is incredible. I felt like Harriet the Spy or something. I wanted to like correct them or whatever, but I was just like, no, I'm just gonna listen. And then about 9 months after I started the comic in May 2018, an editor from Seattle-based publisher Sasquatch Books slid into my DMs one day and asked if I'd be willing to make a book together. It was not something I was expecting, but I was like, sure, I got this. I can make a book. How hard can it be? And I did. And nearly 7 years, several books, hundreds of comics, and thousands and thousands and thousands of walking miles later, here I am. It's pretty magical, and all because I randomly decided to leave my Capitol Hill apartment without any expectations or time restraints, and all without really understanding how to draw hands. My walking interests have evolved a little bit with time. While I was initially attracted to the more ephemeral sights on a long walk, with my book, Secret Seattle, I shifted my focus to unearth the local history behind some of the more overlooked parts of our streetscape, like sidewalks, utility covers, and fire hydrants. For example, since Taha shared some utility pole sleuthing, I thought I would share a way that you too can become a little utility pole detective in your neighborhood. This is a comic I made a few years ago. It says, "This fall, date a utility pole." And then it says, "I recently learned that you can tell how old some Seattle utility poles are just by looking at them. Utility poles are given date nails when they are installed that reflect the year that they went up. For example," and then I have drawings of date nails that I've seen from 1994, 1973, and 1944, which I spotted on East Thomas Street between Harvard Avenue East and Broadway East on Capitol Hill. It continues, "Sometimes the date nail is missing because it fell out or was removed by a date nail enthusiast." I highly recommend doing some date nail spotting in your neighborhood. There's usually a little flat kind of notch thing cut into the pole, so that's the thing I look for first, and if a date nail is present, that's where you would find it. Since making this comic, I actually found an even older one, this one from 1939, near South Dearborn Street and 19th Avenue South. It's my favorite combination of fun and concerning. Seattle's population has nearly doubled since this utility pole was installed. And it's just been quietly sitting there, watching the whole thing. This is the kind of thing that I love to discover on walks, these mundane parts of the streetscape that have a story to tell, a bit of historical intrigue, these common threads that tie us to the past but are firmly rooted in the present. So that's me, basically. I'll hand it over to Cynthia. Thanks for listening.
Hey everyone, great to see you. Thank you for coming out. My name's Cynthia, and I founded Vanishing Seattle in 2016. And it started out as social media and also grew to include documentary film, exhibits, and other projects. But before 2016, the idea for Vanishing Seattle had been knocking around in my brain for a while as I saw the places that I cared about in the city disappearing at this seemed to be really rapid rate. And I wanted to share with y'all the place that I considered to be the catalyst that actually pushed me to start the account. And that was a spot called Inay's, which was a Filipino restaurant in North Beacon Hill. It was opened in 2007 and was owned by Uncle Ernie Rios, and he named Inay's after his mother. And Inay's was known for being a really warm and welcoming space, for its delicious home-cooked Filipino food. And I had a friend who worked there as a server and also became Inay's resident drag queen. Her name's Natasha Manila, and she started drag show every Friday that was just epic and amazing. And what happened with Enise is that North Beacon Hill was gentrifying, and so the rent got raised on the building, and Uncle Ernie decided he was going to have to close. So I went to Enise for its closing night. Happened to be a Friday, so Atasha was going to be performing there for the very last time. And so I'll share with you a short clip from Enise closing night. So that is the glorious Atasha Manila. Yes, and as you can see, the place was just packed out with friends and family and fans. And if you didn't catch the song that Atasha was doing, it was Effie's song from Dreamgirls, and I'm telling you, I'm not going. And I just found it to be a really powerful, defiant moment. I was really affected by it, and I went home that night and grabbed the Vanishing Seattle account on Instagram and Facebook and uploaded a video of her performing that song, and that turned out to be my very first post on Vanishing Seattle. And I think I just felt compelled to share this out with the world, to demonstrate like this is such a special and magical and to me very uniquely Seattle space where you had this cross-section of the Beacon Hill community, the Asian American and Filipino community, the queer community, all together in one space, which I feel is not easy to replicate. And this is what, you know, we stand to lose as a city and as a community when we lose and push out places like Enise. So huge shout out to Atasha and Enise for kind of, I guess, causing me to pull the trigger and create Vanishing Seattle. And I'd also like to share with y'all a few places in the Central District, since that's the neighborhood we're covering today, that I posted about on Vanishing Seattle in the past. And the first spot is a place called R&L Home of Good Barbecue. And this was located on Yesler between 18th and 19th. It was opened in 1952 and served up Louisiana-style barbecue over 3 generations of the family that ran it. It was opened by Louise Collins and her husband, Reverend Robert Collins, and then was run by their daughter, Mary Davis, and then her daughters, Barbara and Cheryl. And Miss Mary never turned down anyone who was hungry, and Home of Goods hot links and ribs and secret sauce was known all over and drew people from all corners of the country. To name a few, James Earl Jones, Sammy Davis Jr., Public Enemy, all came to Home of Good. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., during his only visit to Seattle in 1961, came to Home of Good when it was closing and then ended up staying and eating and talking until the early morning. And Mary Davis and her daughters ran Home of Good until November of 2018, when it closed after 66 years. And then in 2020, appropriately, it became home to the Barbecue Pit, which was owned by Edward Whitfield, also known as Pookie. And this was actually the 3rd location for Barbecue Pit. Its prior space at 23rd and Plum, they were displaced from, was torn down for apartment redevelopment. Before that, it was located at 25th and Cherry. And Pookie brought back into the space his signature posters and pictures of Black and Seattle and Central District legends and artists. And the Barbecue Pit closed around 2022. Pookie had to take care of some family, but still ran a catering business on the side. The next place I'll share is before I go on to that, so one of my favorite things about Vanishing Seattle is the stories and the memories that people will share about places, which I'll encourage people to leave on the post. So a couple memories that folks shared about Home of Good. Went here since I was a kid. They used to have arcade machines by the door when I was little. Me and the other neighborhood kids would play after ordering. That's the corner where my parents met. My mom was leaving Home of Good Barbecue eating a chipped beef sandwich, and my dad had just gotten a haircut at the barber shop on the other corner. So the next place is actually right across the street from Home of Good, and that's the original Bryant Manor. And I posted about this in November of 2022 because November 3rd had just been proclaimed by the mayor as Sir Mix-a-Lot Day because of the artistic and cultural contributions he's made to the city, as well as his championing of live music venues and artists during the pandemic through his involvement with the Keep Music Live campaign, and also because Sir Mix-a-Lot was raised in the Bryant Manor projects. So Bryant Manor was constructed in 1972. It was owned by First AME Housing, which was a part of the First African Methodist Episcopal Church, and it was developed as low-income and affordable housing for Black and immigrant and POC seniors and families. And the building did get torn down, but luckily it's still under the ownership of First AME, and so they replaced the aging buildings with 2 new buildings and even more low-income and affordable housing, as well as the Ashe Prep Early Learning Center. And here's a memory someone shared about Bryant Manor. My family lived there in the late 70s to early 80s when I was in elementary school. Mix was my neighbor, and I fondly remember banging on the walls when he played his stereo loud. And then the last place I'll share with you all is a not vanishing spot, because I like to share not vanishing sometimes just to balance out all the bummer content. And also, just let folks know about places that are still around that, we can all still support. So this spot is one of my favorites. It's Flowers Just For You on the corner of 23rd and Cherry. It was opened in 1984 by Mary Wesley and is one of the only Black-owned flower shops in the region. Mary moved to Seattle from DC in 1956 and worked for Boeing into the 90s. Before that, she went back to school for flower design and then opened her original Flowers Just For You shop that was on 23rd and Jackson. So Miss Mary's been serving the Central District community for 40 years, and her flowers have been a part of generations of weddings, funerals, celebrations. And she's also seen and weathered a lot of changes and challenges in the Central District over the past 4 decades. For example, there was a years-long construction project on 23rd Avenue that affected her business. Then her building was torn down for development. Then she moved to her current location, and the lack of parking and foot traffic really affected her business. And then she got an eviction notice. So when the community learned that Miss Mary might close her shop, they really rallied around her, and Africa Town started a GoFundMe campaign, and they were able to raise enough money to keep her going. So with the supportive community, Miss Mary and her shop have been able to persevere and to flourish. She knew my grandmother when she was alive. I'd buy my grandmother roses from Just For You, and the note would always be handwritten in cursive. You don't get that anymore. She's the best. This makes me incredibly happy to hear. I used to visit her shop in the old location over a decade ago. I'd pet her dog, Ginger, and listen to her tales of life in Seattle and DC over the years. Miss Mary was such a blessing to me back then. Now to see her little store still going warms my soul. She's such an iconic, kind human. Please, Miss Mary, keep going. And I think that's a good note to end on, to, support shops like Just For You and the spaces in your neighborhoods and communities so they don't vanish. And even for the ones that, aren't around anymore, just continue to share the memories and stories. Because, I think they're a part of what kind of make up the collective memory of us as a city, and maybe the kind of city that we all want to live in. So thanks so much.
Hello, my name's Kathy. Thank you so much for your presentations. I'm a rare Washington native, born and raised in Tacoma. lived in other parts of the country for a bit, went to school elsewhere, and just had to come back. And really enjoyed your presentations. My question is, we've seen profound population growth in this area. And what you're describing is sense of place and place attachment. How do you think we might help newcomers to understand the value of these places, as you mentioned, to frequent some of the shops, some of the vendors, but how do you introduce this deeper sense of place to people who have not perhaps grown up with it or been here for decades?
Does anyone want to go first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've grappled with this myself, and I mean, I think wherever you come from, there's going to be memories you have of places that are important to you, and I feel like, you know, people are social animals. We want to have connection, and I'm always interested in the interplay between people and space and how they influence each other. So I don't know, maybe it's like tapping into this just universal need for connection and places they care about. And I have had people who are new to the city say to me, like, oh, this place was gone before I got here, but it reminds me of like a bookshop I used to go to, like, back in my hometown, and I wish that that place was still here so I could enjoy it, or so my kids could enjoy it. But yeah, I think the key is really people, you know, do need to get out of their house and go out in community, connect with spaces, connect with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think talking about it, just being vocal about the things that you like about your city or that catch your eye about the city, I wasn't getting a lot of that before I started Seattle Walk Report, like on an individual level. And so when I decided to share kind of individually to me what was catching my eye, the amount of people who suddenly went, yes, me too. I never thought that somebody would draw the roundabout on my street or these tiny little details, and kind of highlighting these things in a different sort of way and being enthusiastic about it. It seems like it makes a little bit of a difference.
For me, I had left Seattle for about 15 years, and when I came back, the city was unrecognizable. Like, literally, there were neighborhoods I'd be driving through, and it just looked, I didn't know what place I was in. And the trees were really anchors for me. My earliest memories are of the cherry trees that line the quad at the University of Washington, and I've had the privilege of being able to see them grow older and bigger over time, and there's something powerful about seeing that same tree growing over time in the same place. And for lack of a better way of saying it, it made me feel rooted. And I think that is one of the keys helping new people to Seattle experience. A lot of people come to the city and they spend a lot of time indoors. I've heard the average percentage of time we spend indoors across America is about 93% of our time. So we're not really in our places that much. And the trees were a way for me to, well, selfishly for me first, to make contact with a place by identifying certain features and recognizing and acknowledging and knowing the name of a tree that I had passed by so many years and never noticed before. So I think helping people get out, helping them see their local areas, it sounds like an obvious thing, but it's really not these days. You know, we evolved in a three-dimensional world, and we spend most of our time now looking at these two-dimensional screens. And there's a lot of research that says being outdoors and looking at the organic geometry of nature is just what we need. And without that, we tend to not be able to focus on things. We get stressed out, we get depressed, and we can't put our finger on why. And it's the most obvious thing, I think.
Thank you so much. My question was actually going to be about how you guys foster breaking the Seattle freeze, which you kind of just did. So I'm a new writer for the Capitol Hill blog, and I was wondering... Yay! Thank you. 2 articles out, neither of them very good, but we're trying. I was wondering if there's things that you guys do every day to foster a sense of curiosity and just love for Seattle. I love Seattle, and I try to break the Seattle freeze every day, kind of the way that you're doing it by showing appreciation for the little things. But I was just wondering if you guys could share any daily things or just things that have given you inspiration for endless creativity and, breaking the Seattle freeze.
I would like to start on that one. So creating this book, I've had lots of people reach out to me, and I've been surprised by how many people are people new to Seattle. I didn't know it would be interesting to people new to Seattle. When I made this book, much like Susanna, I thought this was going to be something for myself that I would throw on the shelf. Maybe a couple of eccentrics might like it. So I was taken aback by the response people had to this. And I think part of that is people wanting to have communities and not knowing where to find them anymore. Even just these readings and events have been such fun excuses to see people from kind of all different times of my life and other people's lives coming together around this common interest. One daily thing is social media. I know that's technology, but when I post things, I try to think about not just the street tree that people should visit, but maybe some local businesses nearby. I try where I can to say, hey, go check out this cafe, things like that. But yeah, I don't know if you guys...
Yeah, I can't remember the exact quote right now, but conservationist Rachel Carlson has a quote that's something like, a key to looking at your environment with curiosity is to ask yourself, what if I had never seen this before? Or what if I never see this again? So kind of approaching even like a crushed up chip bag on the sidewalk. It's like, maybe I've seen a crushed up chip bag on the sidewalk before, but I haven't seen one on this unique day, in this unique situation, never to be repeated again. So truly like tuning into these little parts of my environment just sort of changed everything for me. And I think it is a way that new Seattleites can kind of start looking and asking questions and just saying why instead of just being like, I'm just trying to get to where I'm going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I really love about both of y'all's work is like finding beauty in the maybe overlooked or everyday things. Yeah, and I think for me, it's like maybe finding beauty in an old dive bar or maybe a business I've been to a million times, but maybe there's a new question I have about it or there's another person hanging out there that I can talk to and hear about why they like that place. Yeah, I mean, running Vanishing Seattle can be kind of heavy and depressing sometimes because, you know, it's covering a lot of things that are going away that people are sad about and grieving. But the thing that, you know, really does keep me going is being able to get out and to talk to people, to small business owners, to other people in the community, and just, you know, hearing what is it about these places that are meaningful to people. That matter, that might not be in like, I don't know, like a shiny, you know, guide for tourists about Seattle, but.
I love that you included the comments from your account on there because I find particularly your Vanishing Seattle account to be a community in the comments section. Like it's this place where people can share their memories that they have of the same place. And it goes back to that idea of the collective memory, places that everyone kind of remembers that are in the background of lots of people's experiences. And I think we see less and less of that over time, but projects like this are trying to create that celebration of those collective moments.
First of all, thank you for all your efforts in protecting and making it a better community and doing what you're doing for the environment is what I care about. So we see the tree beds in New York are open for anyone can adopt the tree bed and plant and take the garbage out and make it better. Do you happen to know, because I kind of feel like if we even take on our own tree beds in our front, I moved to Belltown, I've already done my tree beds on my block, but just planting flowers or whatever it is to contribute and showing the respect. And sometimes that's your opportunity to meet people and to bond over the mutual love for what we have in our own backyards or front yards. So do you know about if that can be done in Seattle, if that's allowable? Someone actually pointed out to me that it's not, and I question that, but I hadn't researched it yet.
Well, most people don't know that they're eligible to receive up to 3 free trees, apparently, from the city of Seattle, 6 max. And I think that's an awesome thing. So you are allowed to kind of plant whatever you want. And Seattle is unique. I think that that we take for granted that on a single block you're going to see a palm tree, a Douglas fir, a maple, and then this random eucalyptus. That doesn't happen in every city. We have one of the most diverse street tree programs in the entire United States. So double the diversity of trees on the East Coast and triple the Midwest. And Seattle's street tree program, as far as planting the same kind of tree on a street, that happened relatively late. So for a good portion of Seattle's history, people just planted whatever they wanted out in front of their house. So you get this modge podge of people's different styles and different ways they want to express themselves. I know that there are some laws now, to your point, whether it's allowed or not. For example, the big leaf maple. It is a native tree here in King County. It also happens to grow enormously. And it used to be the most abundant kind of street tree we had in Seattle until people figured out that it busted up sidewalks. Now it is illegal to plant one of those in your planting strip. And I believe it is also illegal to plant fruit trees in your planting strip because they create it's an attraction for vermin, I guess. So there are these weird little rules here and there, but for the most part, no one's really enforcing if you plant something. I've seen so many rogue trees I cannot even describe. There's this awesome apple tree that ended up in the city's data set, even though I'm sure it was not deliberately planted. It wasn't even in the planting strip. It was on the other side, growing between 2 garbage cans, and I figured what probably happened is an apple core fell out of the garbage, and that's how that tree ended up there. But what I love is that the city picked it up and put it into the data set anyway.
I just wanted to comment on the street tree policy that the Seattle Department of Transportation has. There's an online street tree map.
Yes, there is.
That is a fantastic resource that lists every tree by number. And if you know the address of a tree, if you want to find out about your tree, you can go look at that address and you can see a dot there, and a database will explain the qualities of the tree. Unfortunately, there's all kinds of trees that aren't between the sidewalk and the curb, that there is no map for, and they are not numbered, and there is kind of a Wild West open season on trees.
Yep.
So we need to recognize that these trees take 80 years to grow. You can't plant a tree and have a replacement. And unfortunately, in our city code, it gives you that impression that you can plant a tree that's as big as about chest high or so and have that be a quote-unquote replacement. And I guess my last comment is there's a kind of a hidden maintenance responsibility for street trees. If you were to ask people who is in charge of your tree, you would probably get an inconclusive answer. So we really do need to take care of our street trees. So thank you so much for publicizing this resource in this fantastic book.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it is a really important point to remember that a mature large tree, on average, provides 10 times the physical and mental health benefits as a small tree. So even though our ordinance allows people to plant, I believe, like 10 trees to make up for the one tree that they cut down, that is not a replacement, exactly like you mentioned. So there are certain birds that will only return to the same nesting area. Kathy mentioned this to me earlier. When you get rid of a tree, you're also getting rid of a community of birds that might be there, or insects, or things like that. And one more thing I wanted to mention is that the ordinance is a little bit tricky right now. It's a crazy thing, but there's actually a different set of rules for developers than there are for homeowners, as I understand it. So for homeowners, it's under a certain amount, a certain diameter that you are allowed to cut down your trees. But for developers, they are given a kind of guarantee where they can develop up to, I believe it's like 85% of the plot, and no tree is protected except for a kind of tree called a heritage tree. There are only about 253 heritage trees in the entire city. And that program is closed. No one can nominate trees for that program anymore. So these two sets of rules are a little bit at odds. One is called a tree protection rule, but it's more like a developer guarantee. And if these trees were valued for the infrastructure that they actually are, the mental health benefits they provide, the physical climate resilience they provide, they would be protected more, I think.
Are any of you familiar with the Panama Hotel that was the feature in Hotel on the corner of Bitter and Sweet? Mm-hmm. It's there and it's lovely, and I encourage everyone to go there.
And it has some amazing honey locust street trees in front of it. They're gorgeous, they really are. They just look humanoid. They're like craggy and just gorgeous.
Yeah, it might have be the only preserved Japanese American bathhouse in the country as well. So yeah, ditto on the importance of paying it a visit.
And actually, the caretaker of that building has done a great job, I think, maintaining that history. If you go to the back of the cafe in the main floor, they've put a little glass area where you can look down into the basement. And they haven't touched anything in the basement, but it's basically the suitcases of the Japanese community that was incarcerated. They had nowhere to put their things, so they all came to the Panama Hotel, put it in the basement. Nobody touched anything. Only 1/3 of the community returned after World War II. And that is something you can go see at the back of that cafe.
Thank you again. Please join me in a final thanks to our presenter.